All right, hey guys, it's Luke here, and lesson two, I'm going to talk about blocking out your schedule. So we talked in lesson one really mainly about just setting the right goals. So I encourage you really to go back. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, go through the goal setting course. I think that's it's crucial for runners of all abilities. I think just knowing what the differences are between types of goals, how to set realistic goals, and then give yourself really more actionable things that you can do in order to be more successful and stop putting just all the reliance on just a time that comes out, right? We don't want to do that. It's a tough way to measure what our success really is. So lesson two, I want to move beyond that. I want to start looking at blocking out an entire schedule, what that's really going to look like. And so what I will do is, I'm looking at so I just ran a race to my next race till the end of my next race, right? And so ideally you have enough time there, right? Sometimes people start looking at these things and they don't really have a ton of time. So just my two non-negotiables really are the recovery. To me, it just doesn't make sense at any point to start a new training block when I'm not recovered from a big race segment that I've just completed, right? So if I've just done a big marathon. So actually right now I'm recording this, it's late November, and really, as we've coming up, people maybe have just done New York. Some people have Cal International coming up. I've had people ask me about running Houston in January, but with the whole thing being running those races and then jumping right into Boston training, right? And so in that example, it doesn't make sense to do a hard marathon. Well, not that any marathon segment is going to be easy, but doing like say a marathon segment and then jumping right back into another difficult segment without being fully recovered, right? Now, there's some points where that might make sense. So if I just did a 5K segment and then I'm going to transition into, say, a half marathon segment or something like that, I don't necessarily need a full recovery, but I still should be taking some sort of recovery, right? I'm not going full blast right into the next segment, and that can look different, but that's beyond the scope of this video. So main thing is I want to be fully recovered going into a long segment of training, right? And on the other end of that, I want at least 8 to 10 weeks. And not at least. I think I really want about 8 to 10 weeks of that last part of the segment being where I can dedicate that to being race specific, right? So especially for half marathon on up, right? And the half marathon, well, mainly half marathon and marathon segments there. And that's going to include the taper, right? So really eight weeks of dedicated training, mostly marathon specific or race specific work, and then tapering into that, right? And so if I can't maximize that race specific training, then I'm not going to be able to maximize my performance. And so you have to keep that in mind. So if that leaves you with a block of time that's, I don't know, ideally 4 to 6 weeks. So when I count that, I'm saying recovery, and then hopefully I can spend 4 to 6 weeks of base building / general fitness, maybe some transition type work, and then last 8 to 10 weeks of race specific work. So that's ideally what we're looking at. Maybe a little bit longer, maybe a couple more weeks in there, but it doesn't have to necessarily be perfect, but that's what we're ideally looking for. In that kind of middle ground, focus on what's going to make the most sense to bridge the gap between recovery and being able to build up to where you're going to be able to tolerate the race specific work, right? So also I want you to take into account what you've done the previous segment, right? So, if you've done a half marathon segment, then we don't necessarily need a long stretch of where we're doing, air quotes, speed work and strength work, right? Because you've already done a ton of that work in your last segment. So we don't necessarily need to spend 6 to 8 weeks to redo that, but we do need some time to where we can go from taking that recovery to where I'm going to be able to handle my marathon specific work. So just keep those things in mind as you lay those things out. So on the flip side of that, if you find yourself short on weeks, then it might be a good idea to revisit your goals and determine if what you're trying to accomplish matches what you're going to be able to do for training, right? So again, if you're only going to have an abbreviated amount of time to really kind of set yourself up for success. I'm not saying necessarily that you need to not go after that race, but you need to maybe look at what is going to be possible. And then that goes back to the goal setting thing in lesson 1, right? If I'm taking all those things into account, what is actually going to be possible, right? And you might hit it out of the park and reach that original goal, but I think if you're looking at it and you're looking at it objectively, then you can kind of set yourself up to be more inclined to have success rather than just set yourself up for something that is going to take a near miracle for it to happen, right? So just take all those things into account and then block those things off accordingly, right? And so if you have to cut a couple weeks off the race specific to make it more like 8 weeks, then, that's fine. But just recognize like you might be not quite setting yourself up. So you're going to have to play around with that and see what that looks like. And also just here in my notes, I have like the goal with this phase of plan building is I want you to lay everything out, right? So that there's nothing, well, at least less that is going to be able to blindside us later on, right? And so, and I'll attach a 24-week blank calendar. This is like if you've ever gotten one of our PDFs of our training plans, it's the same thing. It's just blank, but it allows you to lay everything out, right? You can use it. You can set it up for the dates. You can pencil everything in. And then also what you can do is, you can look at upcoming work travel. You have any vacations you have scheduled, holidays coming up. Like right now, obviously everybody's, thinking about Thanksgiving and then going into the holiday season in December. It's a crazy time of year, right? So is being, knee deep in really hard training, is that going to be conducive to actually producing fitness? Whereas, you might just need some freedom to kind of be able to bounce around some days and things like that. And then also what I have in here is honestly one of the biggest segment killers I see people do is taking vacations 6 to 8 weeks during a training, the last 6 to 8 weeks of a training block, right? So in the summer, it's summer family vacations, but they're getting ready for big marathon segments. Or I've had recently people going on early fall vacations, taking a week off. It's just hard when one, you have to factor in the travel. 2, you're going to a new place. Are you actually going to be able to get those runs in? Then your time's really spoken for, as far as if you have a family and you're going to Disney or something like that. And then you're on your feet all day there. Like, does it make sense? And then in the flip, and when you get into the winter, sorry, I'm saying flip side a lot. No, don't really say it. If you go into the winter, I don't know how many times I get people saying, well, we're going on a ski vacation, but I'll still get my runs. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not getting your runs in, right? Like, we're going to have to plan around that, because I don't care what you say. I don't care what your intentions are. Once you're on a ski slope all day, you're not running. And you might have run early the first day and then skied all day. And then the second day, I know that that's not happening, right? I don't care how motivated you are. It's more times than not, it's not happening. So anyway, so that's kind of a side rant there. Like, plan those accordingly, right? Like, if you're training for Boston, no ski vacations after late February. So keep that in mind. All right. And like I said, I will attach a blank worksheet that you can pencil in that training that you can use to just, and I say pencil, and I'm literally meaning, not what, I don't know what I'm doing here. I mean pencil, right? Because I want you to be able to erase and adjust. The other thing you can do is just, if you're in Team LH and you have a schedule you want to do, one thing I will do with athletes is I will put that whole schedule, I'll put the whole schedule in for an athlete. Or if I'm coaching that person, what we'll do is, I ask specifically, okay, what do we have coming up? What do we need to plan around? I know sometimes work vacation just kind of comes up, but I really stress that they let me know as soon as they know, so that we can adjust the schedule. But if you can lay out as much as you can, and even on the final surge calendar, you can adjust that in advance, right? We can figure out what maybe I can do before I leave, and then what makes more sense. Like, so for instance, like if I'm leaving on a long work weekend, like I'm going to be gone Thursday through Sunday or something like that, we might set something up where I put them into a workout that's going to be pretty hard before they leave. And then I'll just give them something that I know that they can get in. And if they don't get it in, it's not going to be the end of the world. And then what are they going to feel like doing when they come back? And a lot of times, like a longer run at an easier pace is more doable because it's going to suck, but they can gut it out and run easy for a long run, right? So you can make those adjustments right away, and then move on from there, right? And so we can kind of work around that if we have to. All right, so but that's what I recommend doing, and just looking at that whole screen. Final search is pretty good. You can view like up to 6 to 8 weeks at a time, and with the scrolling feature, I would just say that put a plan in that you want to do, and then you can just see what those weeks look like, and you can drag and drop days around. It makes it super easy to do. So that's what I would do if you don't want to do the write things out. But I know a lot of people just writing those things out. All right. Anyway. All right. So let's move on to some questions that I get all the time. First one, what is the minimum amount of time for a plan? And so I would say plan's maybe not the right word, but it assumes you put in one plan and it lasts a full cycle. And I do have options where you can input blocks of time, 6-week blocks, and build out a training cycle that way. But in any case, what I would say is if you're an experienced runner, or let me back that up. Okay, so let's go by distance. If you are running a 10K or under as your main focus, I would say 12 to 16 weeks is about what you really want. And then for a half marathon up to a marathon, I would think 14 to 18 weeks for most people. There are longer plans in there, but a lot of those include like a dedicated base building phase to better prepare them for that. So then you could look at those, but that would be a case by case basis. But on average, I would say 12 to 16 weeks for 10K and under. I would say 14 to 18 weeks for half marathon and marathon. This might get longer. Like I said, if you're doing a base phase on top of that for a marathon or something like that, or even for shorter races and you're just kind of building your volume, or you want to extend that out with a longer taper phase, kind of like we call it taper championship phase, where we've really drastically cut the mileage out, but we're going to try to race several times in a 4 to 5 week block of time, right? We're going to race a few times, right? So maybe 3 times in that 5-week stretch. So that might lengthen that out a little bit as well. Averages. Second question, where do I focus if I don't have time for a full cycle? I think the big thing is that there's always going to be a situation where a person can't get a full buildup, right? There's always something that comes up, but hopefully it's not often. Hopefully it's not every time, right? But I'm looking at certain people that want to race. I have a couple of athletes. It's nothing wrong with this at all. And it's not something that they're going to do all the time. But I've had an athlete, like right now I have an athlete who just ran New York, needs to turn around and run Tokyo because they got into New York. So that was like, okay, we're doing that. And then they got into Tokyo and it's like, okay, now we have to do that. But then after that, we don't have anything until the fall. So it's not an all the time occurrence, but it is a situation where we're going to have a quick turnaround between New York and then coming back from March, right? And so always look at the last 6 to 8 weeks of training that I have to race. And in that, I'm not including the taper. So that really pushes that out more to that 8 to 10 weeks that I talked about in the beginning of the video. So that's always going to be what you want to focus on during the last stretch. And this is going to be mostly made up of race-specific work, some supportive work, right? So for half marathons, it's going to be a lot of longer half marathon pace tempos. And then, kind of what we say for the marathon is the strength, but that's going to be mostly longer repeats at lactate threshold, right? And that's the supportive work. Marathon, that's your strength and your marathon tempos, right? And your longest long runs. The start of that time, so if I only have, 12 weeks to build up, we have to be at a level that we can safely tolerate, but then we also have to build it up to where we can jump into that race specific stuff that lasts 6 or so weeks, right? So given that, like if I only have 12 weeks and I haven't done any marathon pace work, I'm not going to jump right into 8+ mile tempo runs. I might jump into 6 by mile or at goal marathon pace or current marathon pace, and then kind of stretch out the length of the repeat I'm doing and get down to where I'm getting closer and closer to goal pace, right? So it's always got to be something that's going to help either support where I am going for that race specific work, or it's going to be smaller amounts of what I want to do at that race specific work so that I can bridge into the stuff that I need to that last 6 to 8 weeks, right? And then working back from that smaller block, I'm going to assume you don't have much time. So it's really going to come down to getting ready for that last 6 to 8 weeks. So again, if you're trying to stretch something out, You have to be able to take it from where you're at. You always have to start with where you're at and bridge the gap to where you need to be over that last 6 to 8 weeks. My general thought on that is it's probably going to be some combination of building volume and some sort of thresholds. That to me would mean some sort of 2 to 3 minute repeats at 10K to LT pace. Whereas with a half marathon distance, it might be longer, 3 to 5 minutes, or at pace, or 5+ minutes at half marathon pace, right? Overall, average situations, 10 to 12 weeks is about as close as I'd want to cut it. In some situations, like doing a half marathon, then deciding on a marathon in the next 8 weeks, it can be done. So if you went through a half marathon segment, you did like a 12-week segment, 14-week segment, and then you took 3 to 5 days and ran easy, and then jumped right into a marathon segment that was one of our 8-week plans that is dedicated to that, you could do that. But if you're doing a marathon and then hopefully turning around and running a series of 5K races in 8 weeks, that's probably not advisable. So use discernment on how you're going to do this, right? Third question, where do I start with my volume on a new plan? This is where recovery and regeneration is key. This is the time to gradually add some easy miles back into training. It's also a good reason why some sort of active recovery is taken in, so that the transition from post-race recovery into regeneration can be that much smoother. It's also a reason why incorporating the base period into a buildup is key, because it's easier way to get the volume back to where it needs to be. And then we're doing that before we're adding the intensity back at the same time, right? So when you add both those things at the same time, that's usually when people end up being injured later. Usually like 6 to 8 weeks, it all will start off fine, but then it goes downhill really quick. So if we can add one first, the second is a much easier to add in, and it's a much safer process to do. Going from a marathon segment to a half marathon or under segment, I'd say if you're at 35 to 40% of your peak segment volume, you will be fine. So if you ran 60 miles a week during peak marathon training, you'd want to start a speed segment at a minimum of 20 miles to 25 miles a week. However, the peak for your speed segment will probably not be as high as what it was for a marathon segment. Take that into account. So in reality, it's 20 to 25, it's 35, 40% of your peak marathon volume, but it's probably going to be 50% of your new segment, because that new segment's not going to peak out as high as the other longer race segment. Now, going from a shorter race distance segment to a longer one, you'll want to be about 45 to 50% of your upcoming volume, right? So again, using that, if I peaked at 45 to 50 miles, we're kind of throwing that out the window. We're looking at, okay, I'm going to be running 60 miles a week in 10 weeks. So I want to start that segment out at a roughly 30 miles a week, or whatever that number works out to you, that 40 to 50% number works out. And I think if you can do that, you can start out pretty well. Now, I know when you look at like the beginner marathon plan from the books and stuff like that, those percentages probably don't line up. What we're doing there in those 18 weeks is we're basically starting from scratch with people. We're saying, okay, we're going to start from you starting out running from really not doing anything, and we're going to build you up over those 18 weeks. But if you are new, or if you're not new to the plan, you can probably come out a little bit stronger. So that's going to throw those numbers off. And so you can, if you're going to use one of those plans, you can adjust those volumes accordingly. Or you can use that post right after your segment, maybe take the first couple of weeks of speed segment out of the advanced plan and just focus more on the volume and get that up. And so that where you're the last 16 to 18 weeks, and you're actually doing more of the intensity, right? But if you are truly able to use that advanced plan, we know that you are probably training consistent and for a regular basis. So being able to bounce back quicker is going to be more likely. All right. And then the last question I have that I usually get is, what if your plans start too high or low for me? And then we kind of just went over that. But the biggest thing is focus on building the volume before the intensity, right? So if you're doing the beginner plan, or you're doing an 18-week plan of mine that starts out a little bit lower than what you want to be at, you can bump the easy volume up. I'm fine with that. But if there's workouts in there, I would probably scratch the workouts while you are bumping the volume up. And those plans are all built in the sense that you are going to be able to, if you took 2 weeks off of those plans and you just focus more on the volume, you're still going to be able to jump into whatever workouts starting that you you would be at on the schedule. You don't really need to adjust for those workouts. And if you are doing the workouts, I would still focus on bumping the easy volume up first. Workouts rarely need to be adjusted. And I don't want you to bump up both at the same time. I want you to focus on volume first, intensity second. So if the intensity is a little bit less than where you would normally be at because you're going to be increasing the overall volume, that's fine. You're still getting it a little something in, and you're not mitigating the risk that you're running of becoming injured further down the line, right? All right. So if the mileage is too high for you at the start, then consider if it's the right plan for you. I think a lot of, like I've talked about this in a lot of times, that I truly think that so many people are using the advanced plan that would be much better off in the beginner plan. But that's another story. But if you find yourself in a situation where you need to boost your weekly volume by 100% at peak, it's probably too aggressive. So if you've peaked out at 30 miles a week and you expect to do the advanced plan and you're going to peak out at 60 and you've never run over 30 miles a week before, that's probably too aggressive. So either add more base weeks to your plan or your calendar to focus on building up your base volume so that you can fall into better percentages and reduce the amount of risk that you're going to run, or really look at a different plan and say, is a plan with less volume better for me now than if I go full send on this plan and really put myself at a risk for becoming injured in 6 to 8 weeks, right? You might be able to get away with a higher increase if you're an experienced runner. That's the last thing. If you are an experienced runner and you're looking at something that is pretty high increase overall in volume, you have to kind of look at where your peak has been in the last several months, right? In the last 3 to 6 months. If it's still going to be that huge increase, maybe back off your expectations per peak volume right now. But chances are, if you've run higher volume in the last 3 to 6 months, you're just not used to doing it right now, you're probably still going to be able to bounce back really quick. But at the end of the day, the same holds true for you, is I would focus on the volume first and not worry about increasing the workouts to match the volume that you're doing, right? That will naturally come, but get the volume back up to where you want it to be first before really focusing on intensity. And with that, what we'll do later on is in the next lesson, we'll talk about starting out at those right intensities. And then that will help you make those increases in your fitness without necessarily increasing the risk of getting injured, right? So it's all a process. I've used the word bridging the gap a lot, and that's really what that first part of any of your schedule is. We're bridging the gap from recovery to getting to where you want to be in that last eight or so weeks, to where you're really dialed in on paces and things like that, right? So don't be too upset if right now you start out at a lower intensity, because we will get you there. It's much better to do that than it is to start off all in on those goal paces and really run the risk of being injured and not even making it to that last 8 weeks. All right, so that's it for this lesson, and we'll move on to lesson 3. All right, I'll talk to you later.